All right, here we are at our first lesson about syntax that's not just a definition. We're going to look at this really important unit, the sentence. And the sentence is really where syntacticians spend a lot of our time. To understand sentences, we have to look at smaller units and larger units, but we're going to really focus a lot on sentences. And I always enjoy looking at sentences that someone said or wrote. So I'm going to focus us on this sentence. It's in English, right? It was taken as a headline. It's very strange, but it's a genuine sentence. And I'm going to focus on English for now because English is a language that I understand well enough that I can talk pretty confidently about at least my own English. And we can then use these examples to look more closely at non-English, oh, that's terrible, at other languages that are not English, because English is just one. It just happens to be the one that I was raised speaking. All right. So, lonely Japanese eels want you to video call them. That's the sentence. That's an eel. Now, one of the first things that linguists will point out about sentences in languages you speak is that you don't need to have heard the sentence before. You don't need anybody to have taught you specifically what the sentence is trying to say. If you speak the language, and if the sentence is grammatical in the language, you will be able to understand its meaning. And how do you do that? Well, we think you can understand sentences because you've learned the relevant words and morphemes, and you also know something about how to interpret their arrangement or their order. So let's look at that in this particular sentence. So, you know, probably, what an eel is, and you know that S at the end of eels means it's more than one of them, and you know that where Japan is or what Japan is, and you know what ease means when it's added to Japan. So you know that the sentence has eels in it and something Japanese, and that Japanese is a modifier form. And when those two words are right next to each other in English, in this order, we can interpret that as meaning, this is an interpretation of the syntax of English, that the eels are Japanese, that Japanese is modifying eels. And you know that even if you don't actually feel comfortable with terms like modifier and noun, right? The terms are ways that linguists try to label things, but the meanings are things that I think you've known since you were a little one. All right. Now we can work our way out from that little phrase. So a phrase, a unit that's containing at least one word and maybe more, and the words in it are working together somehow. So Japanese eels, that's a phrase, and it's got another modifier, lonely. So they're eels, they are Japanese, and the Japanese eels are lonely. Do you see how this is building up piece by piece by combining things? It's not just that we've got one word in front of the other. It's that we're actually figuring out which words work together to create meanings in the sentence. So I don't know if you have a sense as an English speaker whether you could say the sentence with those two modifiers in the other order, Japanese lonely eels. To me, that sounds weird. It's maybe not completely ungrammatical, but it feels like it's not exactly English to say Japanese lonely eels. And it feels like it also means something slightly different than lonely Japanese eels, right? I don't know. I don't know if you get that. They're Japanese eels. They're lonely. And they are, they want. So the sentence is really built around the verb. I'm going to use the term predicate a lot. The verb, in most sentences, the predicate is built around a verb. And the verb want, that has a meaning that says, look, somebody's got to do the action of wanting. Who's wanting stuff? It's lonely Japanese eels. So they're the subject, right? The subject of want, the ones doing the wanting. And they, those eels, they want you to call them. They want you to video call them. So that other part of the sentence, the predicate, is another kind of phrase, because the sort of fundamental word for that phrase is the verb. We call it a verb phrase. And predicates don't have to be verb phrases, but they often are. Subjects don't have to be noun phrases, but they often are. And in this sentence, it turns out that the subject is a noun phrase, lonely Japanese eels, and the predicate is a verb phrase, want you to video call them. It's what they want, right? So want is an English verb. Its specific meaning, its word level meaning, includes the understanding that if there's a wanting event, if there's a wanting out there in the world, somebody's got to do it. That's the subject. And something's got to be wanted. That's the direct object. In this case, I said direct object, which is true, but it's also more generically the complement phrase of the verb. We'll talk more about complement phrases, but they're essentially going to be the things that satisfy the meaning-based requirements of verbs, right? Some verbs have them, some verbs don't, but want needs a complement. It needs, if there's a wanting event, you got to want something, right? So we have the subject and then the predicate, and then within the predicate we have the verb and its complement. And those two things can occur in different orders in different languages, but we think that those basic units, they're probably found in sentences in any language, spoken or signed, at least the ones that we linguists have described, and so we think that might be universal. Now, I've simplified this sentence down into a very basic, make each of those constituents little so we can look at them more carefully. And now we have a definition of a sentence. A sentence is a linguistic unit that contains at least a subject and a predicate. We're going to clarify that sentence, and explore that definition. But I think this is a pretty good summary. And I'm going to alert you to the fact, if I haven't said it before, and I don't think I have, that just because linguists think that languages use sentences, units with subjects and predicates, that's not the same thing as claiming that every time we talk in sentences. Sometimes we talk in sentences, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes we talk in fragments or even individual words that aren't fully fledged predicates Right. So we look for sentences and we want to understand the rules of sentence building because sentences seem to be important in languages, not because everything you say is necessarily a sentence. And saying something that's not a sentence doesn't mean you're saying something wrong. It just means maybe you're using a unit that's not a sentence. You can do that. It's okay. All right, so I think I've said that. Yeah. So I've reduced that complement down so we could see the structure a little bit more clearly, maybe. I said not all verbs need complements. That is a true fact. Some verbs just only need a subject. So you can wait, and if you wait, you don't wait. You don't have to have anything else besides yourself and the waiting, right? All right. And apparently these Japanese eels are waiting, and they do want us to call. And I invite you to read the article if you're interested in helping the Japanese eels. What did we do in this video? Well, we found a sentence in a language that we share. We've looked at the meaning of the sentence to figure out which words were working together to create meaning. We've talked about modifiers, we've talked about verbs, we've talked about complements. We've analyzed the sentence in this two-piece structure, subject and predicate. All right? And we found that the original sentence we started with had a pretty complicated complement, but it could have a simpler complement, and some verbs don't even need any complements at all. And the idea is, this is all stuff you know, but we're not used to talking about it. So it feels weird to break things down in this way and put labels on them. But the good news is that at some level you do this on your own, and it's one of the ways that you do language. All right. Hope to see you in the next video.